everyone. If you're here for the writing seminar, you're in the right place. If you wanted exercise, you're in the wrong place. All right, I think I'll go ahead and get started, just to give you more time to do this. I'm calling this option F because, which will soon become apparent why I'm calling it option F. But it's kind of a mentoring approach to writing feedback. And on your handout, you'll see there that there's some space for you to write down your thoughts and so and so. So you're going to be even sharing these thoughts with people sitting near you, next to you. I'm not going to have you move to break up into groups, but sit close enough to somebody where you can share your thoughts. And especially if you don't have a paper, if you don't have a handout, sit next to somebody who has a handout. I wasn't prepared for more than 15 people. Now come on in. As I said, if you're coming in late, I don't have enough handouts, so try to sit next to somebody with a handout. So, like the three ladies in the back, I don't have handouts for you, but try to sit somewhere maybe closer to somebody with a handout. You must have really good eyes too, because this is going to be small.
I don't either. We can share.
All right, let's go ahead and start with this. My name's Tim Peverill. I'm a teacher at the English language program here at Kansas State University. I've been here for about 4 years now, although I came in 1989, so figure that out. I took a 20-year break to live in the country in Jordan and the country of Oman. So I've come back 4 years ago. So there are a lot of different ways, there's some traditional ways that people give writing feedback to their students, and I'll probably touch on something that you use here. And so like the first one is what I'm calling traditional approach, and I know you can't see that. So I'm going to have to kind of read through this. The traditional approach, students write a draft, we mark every mistake with red, we give them clues as to the nature of the mistake, WF word form, WW wrong word, or whatever your coding system is. This is kind of a traditional way. They rewrite everything. The second draft is graded. How many use that kind of thing, or have used it in the past? Probably. Yeah. So on your paper there, you see a spot for positives and negatives. So just write down your first thought. What is a positive and what is a negative for this kind of approach? I'm just going to give you about 30 seconds to do that.
Well, I think there's a lot of work there. I think that it's all they want. I think the teachers don't feel like we to figure out. We really give them information. So I think it makes the teacher feel like it's a lot of work.
All right. What kind of positives do you have for that approach?
Detailed feedback.
Detailed feedback. Okay, good. What else? Critical thinking. They have to figure out what the mistake is. You've given them a category, right? Okay, what else?
Clearly shows what the errors are.
Clearly, yeah, you're giving them specific guidance to what kind of errors it is, at least. We can't go into all the positives and negatives, but what about some of the negatives?
Too overwhelming.
Overwhelming, yes.
Discouraging.
Discouraging, okay.
A lot of work, too.
A lot of work
Yes,
for the
it's
teacher.
a lot of work.
Yeah, it certainly is.
And they often don't follow they don't follow up and finish and actually fix the mistake.
Yeah, they may not be thinking in your categories, right? So WW, they're like, what's what?
Yeah, what we're doing.
Yeah. Okay, option B. This isn't what many of us do. Students write a first draft and mark only for ideas, support, organization, rhetoric, and flow. Like what they're trying to say. Are they communicating? We do not mark for grammar, spelling, or vocabulary errors unless they interfere with our comprehension of what they're trying to communicate. And then the second draft is graded for all the little details, and then the third draft might be required so they finally get it right or close to right, okay? People use this?
Yeah.
Or have used it?
Used to.
Used to, okay. Go ahead and write some positive and negatives for that option. Again, just very briefly.
I think my positive for this would be that it forces us to pay way more attention to content. And
Right.
less focus on just.
Trying to say.
Yeah, exactly. So, right. It's, yeah. And then it kind of really says, we'll work on that later. Yeah, and when I do it this way, which I've been experimenting with, I find.
I did this one.
When I do it this way, I find that sometimes
This is
grammar.
Okay.
of these options.
I'm going to interrupt you. What are some of the positives of this approach?
It focuses on the content more than
Content, right.
more than the form.
So, and that's the important thing, isn't it?
Yes. Well,
We forget that sometimes. Yeah.
It helps them.
well, it is.
Go ahead, Jack.
I'd steal a math term and say it's order of operations. It's probably the correct
Yeah.
order the stuff should be corrected.
Right,
You know,
right.
global first, moving towards the specific.
Yeah, macro to micro. Yeah. Okay, what else?
It helps them in contextual, how to put the words in contextual meaning, you know what I mean?
Right,
Sometimes they have synonyms for certain things, and it does not work
Right.
in that context, and then they can't figure it out.
So clear communication of vocabulary, before you try to fix the grammar, make sure they're even using the right concept or the right word, yeah. What else?
Students learn the steps of writing.
Yeah, that's the proper way to do writing, isn't it? Yeah, learning the steps. Okay, what about negatives?
It's time consuming.
Time consuming.
Yeah.
Everybody agrees with that, I'm pretty sure.
Goes against student expectations.
Yes.
Particularly in ESL, right?
Yeah.
Okay, elaborate that. How does it go against student
They're
expectations? What do
most
they
concerned
expect?
about their grammar.
Right. They want you to correct their mistakes.
they actually
And
want you to correct
they don't focus on all that other stuff so much. Yeah.
And frustration by the students, because the rewrites, students don't like writing,
Don't like rewriting, for sure.
and they don't like rewriting.
Right,
So
right.
this is the-
So they're getting kind of burnt out on this
Yeah.
topic, You have to do it again. Any other last things you're dying to say? Okay. Another option, peer feedback. Students write a first draft for their peers who are asked to give suggestions on the writing. Some mistakes are deliberately ignored unless they interfere with comprehension. The second draft is for the teacher, who will give final corrections and a grade. And a third draft may be required as well. Okay, so the only feedback they get is from peers.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead and write some positive and negatives.
It's good to. It's all right.
Well, and I think they have a lot to discuss. Yeah, I think they're a little bit being critical.
And I like, I have
Actually, I've been thinking about changing this.
I don't know.
I'm gonna start doing peer reviews at home, like sharing digitally.
some really good writers fix somebody.
That might make a good workshop too, because a lot of teachers mark student papers digitally, and how well their students know how to interact
Okay, once again, I'm going to interrupt you. How many of you do this right now? How many of you do this peer feedback right now? How many of you tried feedback and got frustrated with it? Okay, what are positives of this peer feedback in general?
Students often take correction better from their peers than they do from the teacher.
Okay, they take it more seriously, don't they?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a more realistic approach. In real life, they're gonna have to do that in work.
Right, in the workforce, they're going to have to get feedback from peers. At the university, they're going to ask friends. Yeah, what else?
A lot of research shows that international students need to be taught that peer review is typical here.
Right.
And they need to get used to the.
So we're enculturating them to this idea, right? Yeah, so this is a totally foreign concept to them at first, but we're enculturating them, and this is how we do things. Not just in the universities and schools, but in the workplace, you get peer feedback. Okay, any negatives?
Why?
If I say, okay, go find a partner to work with, then it works beautifully normally because they work with their friends, so they're comfortable sharing their feedback. If I pair them up, I say, okay, Jack, you work with Inhi today, but Jack doesn't really like Inhi, so
What? Come on.
it's just an example. Then it may not be as fruitful or beneficial to either of them.
So there's just that awkwardness. that,
Yes.
So
you
it's
know,
positive and negative at the same time, kind of, depending on who you work with, I think.
And there's usually one in a class that refuses to work with anyone.
Yeah.
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 Yeah,
They want to do everything by themselves.
yeah, all the social issues
Yeah.
coming up, don't they? And the interpersonal issues come up. Any other negatives?
I feel like they're not able to identify the mistakes that they see in the other person.
Yeah, not only do they feel inadequate to identify their peers' mistakes, sometimes we don't want to listen to what our peers think because we know we're smarter than them or whatever.
Or bias.
Or bias, yeah. So, and especially culturally, our students are looking from answers from on high, you know, authority. But it does provide a real audience for them, you know, and that's very important that they get used to writing for a real audience instead of a fake audience, which is the teacher. All right, we're up to option D now, high teacher involvement. Already, you don't like the sound of this, right? Students write the first draft in class, the teacher is available for help, the draft's turned in, marked either direct or indirect feedback as the nature of the mistakes. In other words, the teacher goes through each paper in one-on-one sessions. After they mark it, you sit down with the student and you work through it with them, you read through it with them, giving them specific guidance. Okay, go ahead, write some positives and negatives for that.
Right.
So the first part is definitely.
And I discovered this past semester that the pre-writing, I need to have them do more of that in classroom.
I could start, they don't start writing until I prove it out.
But then,
They do that too before they begin to write.
but then the first draft, I'm fine with them doing it on their own. But then I love, I call it workshopping, where I can grade it, marked out.
Because I've already been to sort of.
I said, no, that's figured out.
And I do think that there's
And they have to do their. It's very, it can become very
packed.
Okay, again, positives for this one-on-one high teacher involvement approach. Any positives? Oh, no, you're just waving your hands. Okay. Anybody have some positives? Yes.
A more constructive and more understanding of the concepts of writing given to the
Right, and you can negotiate the
One-to-one,
meaning with them
yeah.
one-on-one, so
And-
make it clear.
And negative could be more of a tutoring and sometimes, too much work on the teacher.
A lot, how many had that, too much work on the teacher?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's very time consuming.
very time consuming. Any other positives before we move to the negatives? Yeah.
It's very personalized for them, so you're not just giving them the paper back, you're spending time with me working through this.
Right, right, and so there's that personal touch, your feedback is shaped for that person, and also it builds a relationship as well.
Yeah.
What about negatives?
Time consuming.
Time consuming, that's the big one,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
All right. Option E, a combination of the approaches above. We've all
Yeah.
done that, I think, probably. I think nobody's a purist when it comes to these things. Okay. But have you tried option F? Okay. Before I tell you exactly what option F is, these are things that kind of drove me to doing it a different way, which maybe might be unorthodox. We have a limited time for each student. Students interest gets less and less as they go through the drafts, right? We get bored doing all the rewrites and stuff. Students have different weaknesses, and you work in different areas. Students think they need corrections of every mistake, but it doesn't help, or it may even hurt, to give them feedback on every mistake. There are many different ways for teachers to correct something. Some of them feel correct, but inadequate. So you're going through the draft, and you're like, I'm not sure what they're trying to say here, but I'll put a correction anyway, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And you're not, it's a little frustrating, it's a lot of decisions to make as you go through all these papers. The importance of modeling the next level up. So just basic in teaching and learning theory is that you give them a model for what's the next level going to look like. Okay? So I don't know if any of these really model anything, do they? Any of the A, B, C, D, E options. So the process for F. Okay, this is step 1. Students write their first draft, but before it's submitted, it can be reviewed by peers or for any specific problems as an option C. Okay? So you still get the benefit of peer review, a real audience, and so on. Step 2, teacher reacts only to the ideas, support, organization, rhetoric, and flow, kind of like option, what was that, B? Okay? The students can seek clarity from the teacher on a one-on-one basis as an option B. So these are all, you're keeping your options open. You can still use your favorite things as much as you have time for it, depending on the size of your class and their level and all that. Step 3, here's where it starts to change. The students submit their second draft on computer.
Which we do it now.
It'll be very important that it's on computer, as it'll become more clear why. The teacher copies and pastes this paper into a new document and rewrites the paper. Okay? So, like you're an editor. Your reporter has submitted this paper, you're the editor, you do the rewrites. Okay? The teacher must be careful to keep the voice of the student as much as possible, even if the wording is a bit awkward at times. This is the balancing act where you use your experience, where you don't completely rewrite the paper, it's still their paper, but you take parts and say, oh, this is how I would phrase it, or this is what I think you're saying, and so on. Or think what you're trying to say. Okay, that's step 3. Step 4, support sentences. This is still part of step 3. You can add in things. A lot of times the problem with papers is things are missing. And usually when you're correcting a paper, you don't write in a whole sentence here for a transition or to help flow or to fill in the gaps. But really that's a big problem with writing, isn't it? There's missing stuff. It's up there in their head somewhere maybe, but it didn't get down on the paper. Okay? So you can actually add sentences with this approach. Paragraphs can be completely rearranged with this approach, which you wouldn't normally do in feedback. Sections and sentences can be cut as well. If they're saying something completely off topic, sometimes we would do that in our regular copy. You draw a big line through it, and it seems like a hostile act, sort of, right? But if it's just missing, they don't even notice it sometimes, which will bring us to the next step. Teachers should also take some opportunities to get better vocabulary or collocation. So, sometimes you just leave it the way they've expressed it, and sometimes it gives you an opportunity to just up their vocabulary level a little bit. Give them a word that's a little more specific, or the tone is better, or whatever. Make all the necessary grammar changes, everything. Okay. Transitions, connections, I'll add all that. You think, wow, that sounds like a lot of work. I found, strangely enough, I didn't feel like it was more work than writing red marks all over the place. I felt like once I had this on computer, I can do it pretty quickly. I like to write, maybe that's... Okay. Both papers are printed out and returned to the students. There are no red marks. No direct indications that anything has been changed or corrected. They just get a new version.
So you wouldn't bold the parts that you changed?
Yeah, no bold.
No bold.
Don't give them any clues yet, because that's part of the approach. Students' original is now double spaced and has rooms in the margin for notes. So you give them back their original that they turn into, you just print that out, and it's double spaced, and you give them yours, which is single spaced. What does this look like? Let me see if I can get to this easily without, I have a document camera. Let's see if I can. Okay. Oh, document camera did not go up.
You might have to change the way it's interacting with the, you know what I'm trying to say? I could see doing this as like one-off, as an instruction piece.
No.
All right, so at this point, I do think it's important that you see what does this look like so you can visualize it. Okay, so here's an example. This is a summary and a response, final draft. So when they got this paper back, they didn't have any of this writing in it. This is all what the student did later. They just had a double-spaced paper. And they had my rewrite. Okay? So just look at this rewrite. In the article, economics professor, we're not closer to happiness than we were in the 1950s. That's the name of the article. From the book Carrying Economics. And I see already I made a mistake. No, that's all right. There's a comma. That's a comma.
We can all see it.
You can't see it? Lord Richard Layard shows that despite rising national income, people feel no happier than they did in the 1950s. So what they wrote was, in the article, economics professor, we're no closer to happiness than we were in the 1950s. Is that exactly the same? Yeah.
We are.
This one? Here, that's a comma.
Closer, we're not closer.
Yeah, the commas are the same. So far, no changes.
Well, not.
Lord Richard Layard discusses the relationship and the interaction between the level of happiness and income. Lord Richard Layard shows that despite rising national income, people feel no happier than they did in the 1950s. Okay, now something's different. Okay? And now the student has to think, why did the teacher write this? And how is that better than what I wrote? So now they have to analyze. Okay? What is the answer there? Why did I rewrite that? Look at that. Lord Richard Layard shows that despite rising national income, people feel no happier than they did in the 1950s. And this one discusses the relationship and interaction between the level of happiness and income. It's the thesis, right? It's, you told what the thesis of it is. It's more specific. So they would read that, and hopefully they would discover, oh, this is more specific to what the writer is trying to say, which is what we try to teach them to do in a summary and response. Maybe they won't even notice it. Maybe they'll just go right by it. And a lot of times the corrections that you make, they don't notice them. But there is something called the noticing hypothesis, right?
Yeah.
And if they're ready to notice it, they're ready to learn from it. If they don't notice it, what does it matter how many red marks you made on it, right? So this is an exercise in noticing. So these are the things that this student did notice. So notice she wrote, the happier they are than the other people who are poor individuals. The happier they are compared to other people who are poor individuals. Okay, so a little vocabulary. But the national happiness of the whole society does not grow with the increasing continuously of income. And so the correction they noticed was continuous increase of income.
Right.
Okay. So she noticed that, and she changed it. Okay. So these are the things they noticed. And here she made some notes. Use the adjective to describe the noun growth. Okay. So instead of continuously growth, use the adjective continuous growth. So she understood the principle and why I corrected that as well. So here's another one. Cannot avoid comparing with people who live around in the daily life. So she noticed that, comparing ourselves to people who live around the daily life. With compare, you need to compare somebody to something. So she understood there's an objectness in there. So this is the idea of the approach. Let me get out of this now if I can get back to my PowerPoint. Here's my...
Go to slideshow.
Okay. I thought there was a shortcut to that.
From current slide.
Yeah.
All right. So you see there's no red marks. You see why you have the students' version double-spaced now, so they have room to write their observations and corrections. They correct every mistake they can notice. The analogy of this approach is like staging a room, right? So here's the living room before, here's the living room after. And you have to use your powers of observation to see what the differences are. That's the first thing. You also use your theoretical knowledge, like why did they make those changes? Okay. I'm not an interior decorator, so I have no idea why they made those changes.
It's too cluttered on the left,
Oh, there you go. Too cluttered. So you get extra credit for noticing that it's too cluttered. You make that note in your notes. You take your client's design, though. You took your client's furniture, your student's furniture, and you kept the furniture. You don't just say, this is ugly furniture, I'm going to start all over. Right? You take what they gave you, and you just tweak it and arrange it as much as you can. And your knowledge of what they're ready to absorb. Here's another staging a room. Okay. Oh, more light here. You might notice, this room is lighter. I like that. Okay, so the key points of this, students are now given credit or a major grade for the completeness and quality of their observations. So you're teaching them to be more observant that they make on their papers. A specific question about a change is also worth something. So if they come to you and say, I don't understand why you changed this, give them credit for that, because they're engaging in the process of questioning it. This puts a different focus for the student's goal for working. You're no longer just trying to avoid mistakes, but your mistakes become your friends because you can learn from them. The student also shows that they learned something and gets credit for that. Another key point, student sees the creativity of the teacher in following the direction of the student's set. So you're making that journey together. The student wants to go this way, you go with them, okay? And you use your creativity. Teacher models something a little more sophisticated than what the student gave you. But still keeping their purposes in mind. Students should explicitly remind the student that these rewrites are still not meant to be the perfect paper. It's just one better version. Okay? There are many different ways you can rewrite something. This is just one better version. I think it's faster. It feels faster. I'll just go with that. I never timed how long it took me to scribble red marks all over people's papers. Okay. I'm more engaged. I enjoy this more. It uses my creativity. I can see what they are grasping or ignoring. I can see how engaged they are in the process as well. It's individualized, so you don't need as many sit-down sessions, one-on-one. Students take ownership of the process which causes actual interest in the corrections. And the learning sticks better. This is I take this on faith. I have no data to show that the learning sticks better. But I think if they find their own mistakes and make their own, if you've engaged their attention and they found it, I think it's going to stick.
Tim, there is research in the, the new technology of brain scans and mapping the activity of the brain. There is research that shows that people actually learn more, their brains are more active when they're responding to their own errors, when they're noticing their errors. So if they make the mistake and they notice how it was fixed, that's an opportunity for growth.
Yeah, I think it's an educated guess that the corrections will stick better. Okay, what about low-level learners? Okay. We don't expect the low-level learners to give explanations about why something was changed, like, oh, subject-verb agreement maybe is as far as they can go. But they're probably not going to write, this transition sentence increases the flow. Your lower level students aren't going to do that. Okay. But your rewriting work is short. You keep the structures and vocabulary at their level. Sometimes what I do with my lower levels is I add a step. After they've marked the papers with all the corrections, then I take back my correct version and ask them to rewrite their paper again, incorporating the corrections they've noticed. So it's basically a copying thing now, which if you've taught low-level students a lot, they need to copy. And copying is an issue for them. And to copy in the corrections is actually reinforces it. So I think that's a good step for lower level.
Right.
I really believe that keyboard skills and Canvas, which is our online learning LMS, thank you. Canvas is our LMS. They're getting used to typing papers from even lower levels. But this approach does not work unless you have an electronic copy. It's the only way it will work. Okay, so we have some time for discussion. Let me go back. Any questions, first of all, before I go back to some
I have
examples?
a question about, so at what point do you have the students, are you assessing students on their ability to generate the improved writing on their own? Do you use this for all of your regular writing assignments, or
Well,
tell us how many times you use this out of
that will come up on the test. If this is working, supposedly they'll be learning from it.
So only on the summative assessment.
Yeah, do you have another suggestion about?
I was wondering if you did it in sort of a scaffolded approach, like the first few, and then after a while you would expect them to.
Yeah, you can always go back to options A, B, C, D, E, whatever kind of options.
Along with that, I think your assumption is that they're noticing their errors, and by noticing them and attempting to correct, or using your corrections, then they're going to sort of internalize that and be able to use that in their next writing?
Yeah, that's my hope.
Okay.
And I think if they start noticing patterns like, wow, I sure got a lot of word form errors there. So I should be focusing more on word form. Or, yeah, notice I didn't have any transitions. He put in a lot of transitions, so maybe I should pay more attention to that. So that's the hope.
Use chronological transitions.
Right, right. Any other?
Have you seen then improvements in the writing that comes after you do this a few times? Do they seem to be?
It's hard to say because I don't have two groups to compare, And so, yeah, I see improvement, but I don't know if that's due to my method or that's just natural improvement. Maybe they're improving because they're reading more books. Who knows?
How large are the classes that you use this in?
I think pretty small.
Okay.
I think I did it with 10 people, was the largest.
How often are they writing?
Well, there's different kinds of writing, so like sometimes for their journal, they just write every day.
Right.
And I don't correct anything, I just react to what they've written. So, this is not a fluency building sort of thing. So, Yeah, I would say do this maybe 4 or 5 times a semester.
And that's a 15-week
Yeah,
semester.
for a full
So we
semester.
have 8 weeks. So half a night.
Yeah.
What do you think would be the maximum number of students in class where you would be like, cannot do this, too many students?
I don't
Like, where
know.
would
Hold
you-
on,
Yeah,
maybe a different way to ask the same question. About how long per paper does this take? Is that,
Yeah. How big the paper is?
okay, so the paper we looked at, which is this long, when I did it and single spaced it, I would say this took me 20 minutes.
I have a question.
not out of line?
Yeah,
In this, like, if you have like a student writing like 3 or 4, 5, up to 6 pages, and they have to incorporate, for example, sources. In this method, I'm worried about the altering the meaning of the, the primary source or secondary source.
yeah. Yeah, I actually wouldn't do this for a long paper, like a research paper. We did research papers this semester, and I didn't do this with their research papers.
Oh,
no.
Or you could do for part of it, you could
Yeah, part of
do
it.
first part of an essay or part of a longer paper and just do that approach with part of it, that
Yeah.
worked.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, for the final, like if they did their own writing on the final paper, they might make a list, look at their previous papers that they've done this, make a list of their typical mistakes, and then have that to look at while they're doing their final.
Yeah, that's a really good
This is what I need to
idea.
edit for.
Yeah, make their own editing list that they can take with them to a final. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Do you think some students might find it too easy for them because you do all the corrections for them and all they have to do is just
They
copy
can
and
definitely
paste?
take the easy way out. But what happens is because I've put that into the grading scheme, when I see that they've taken the easy way out, they don't get full credit, even though they've changed everything, right? If they haven't put in the thought, or, but actually they don't change everything, they just change what they. So if they put in more thought and more work, they get full credit. If they don't, I may only give them half credit. And they're like, why is it half credit? I changed everything. I'm grading the process. I'm not grading the product.
And the process is where they've done the comparison and made the changes on their own paper
And made comments about why they
Uh-huh.
changed it,
Okay.
ideally.
Okay.
So they don't retype anything, they would just submit the document, the double-spaced document with their
Right,
handwriting?
they don't retype anything, unless you want to add that extra step, which I do for the lower level people, where
Right.
they
Okay.
rewrite it. Okay, well, I'm gonna have us look at a few things and just so you see what this looks like in real time. First of all, this is how I give them the homework and how I phrase it. Homework for Monday, 10 points. Look at the argument paper and the way I rewrote it and corrected it. Compare my paper to the paper you handed in. Find the differences and mark them on your paper. Show me what you've learned to get the maximum points. If you include all the details and even some of the reasons for my changes, I will even give you bonus points above that. Have a great weekend. You have to say that.
Do they do the original writing in class, or do they do it at home?
I have had them do it at home because they're typing, and so I typically don't have their computers with them.
Have you tried this method with lower level students?
140 was the lowest I went, but yeah, it works actually pretty well with lower level students. You just have different expectations.
140 is like low
140,
intermediate.
yeah, sorry, the low intermediate.
Okay.
Although I don't see any reason why you can't do it with even beginners, we're working on sentence level.
Yeah.
They benefit the most of the time is someone looking at a model.
Sometimes it's a whole word.
Right.
Sure, you can keep it at their level.
Right. Oh, I guess I didn't bring a lazy student. I was going to show you a lazy student. But you can imagine the lazy student's just gonna cross out words and put in other words,
Right.
right? That's all they're gonna do. Oh, and this is,
152.
okay, so let's look at her notes here. This is from the book Carrying Economics, okay? So when she wrote from the book Carrying Economics, she didn't mention the name of the article. So she noticed that on the rewrite, you should mention the article too, not just the book. Another note, she said, despite rising national income. So that phrase was put in here. Lord Richard Laird shows that despite rising national income, people feel less happy. Okay. Let's see what other things did she notice. She wrote, actually, in the certain time, at any certain time. Most of these are vocabulary.
Tim, did you train them how you wanted them to do this by showing them examples, or how did you get them to do that?
Basically like this, I did it. And so I took one of their papers, and then I showed them my correction, and I just started doing it
Okay.
and making notes on it. I use the document camera in class every day, so the document camera is my go-to teaching tool. Here's a note that's interesting. She put, instead of this constant competition, goes here at the beginning of this sentence. And she noticed, why did I do that? More flow. Because it's tying this information, the old information, to the new sentence. Okay. And I taught them this technique using this, that, these, and those, and then a category word, or restating with a different word form.
Nominalization.
Yeah, yeah. So I taught them that, and this showed me that she got it. Here she's using a connector for flow, and so she really tapped into the idea of flow. More flow and easy to understand. Here's another comment. She said, the corrected sentence uses more suitable than the original one, such as instances, mindset, and the correct part of speech, such as enrich. So she's just making some comments about, instead of to rich our lives, enrich our lives. She's noticing, instead of comparing psychology, she learned a new word, mindset. These are my advanced students, by the way. So these are students who are taking some university classes and also in writing. So you have some discussion questions here. We may have already tapped on them all. There's a question, number 2. What do you think would be your biggest difficulty as a teacher trying to do this method? Long paper, yeah.
And a lot of students. A
lot of
sources
students.
and a lot of-
I would encourage you, though, the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Yeah.
Any of those other questions here? Some people already gave suggestions for modifying the approach, improving the mechanics of it. This is really an experimental thing for me, so I would be interested if you try this, contact me, let me know how it works, or anything you've done to adapt it.
What's your email address?
My email address, write it right here. Another reason to have a document camera.
So can I just say that this is almost the opposite approach to the writing center, talk you through your paper without actually touching your paper approach?
Mm-hmm. You noticed that?
I did. So,
That's for thinking.
I've often thought, I haven't said it out loud, I think you're actually doing the things that maybe that we have thought of but not been brave enough to actually do. That when you do this writing center approach, I'm gonna talk you through we're gonna talk about how your paper makes me feel, you know, and then you're gonna magically understand how to fix those things, that our students don't respond to that well at all.
I think this is a good question. I think a lot of our approaches for writing feedback are formed with native speakers. And with native speakers, it's so important that you don't mess with their voice. That they have their voice and you don't try to change it. And that's the balancing act, because our students are developing a voice in a second language. They don't, I think it's a different thing.
But also, there's almost a taboo about touching their paper. You know, I'm gonna help you make vast improvements, but I'm not even gonna touch your paper, I'm gonna have you do it. Well, if they knew how to do it, they would probably be doing a better job of it in the first place.
Yeah, and to me, the modeling is an important aspect that's been missing in mine.
Well, there are modifications for second language learners. You're right, that is a native speaker theory, but there are modifications.
Yeah, but I'm thinking, you know, when they go to the writing center, what are they writing?
Correct, here they don't have those types of tools.
Sure. And what the students always want, they want somebody to do what Tim did, to take it and fix it, you know?
But they have to find the fixes.
They do. Yeah. It's
And that's where the
progress.
growing.
So how does this feel? So I thought we could do this with a second language for us, which would be Middle English. Or early modern English, okay? So this is how I wrote it, because this is how I want to say it. The west wind also with its sweet breath in every wood and field has breathed life into the tender new leaves, and the young sun has finished half the year in March. That sounds really good to me. In my idiolect, in the way my language that I've formed so far, that sounds really good to me. But then the teacher comes back with this. Zephyrus, eke with his sweet breath, inspired hath in every holt and heath. The tender cropis of the younger sona hath in around his half-course Eurona. And you're like, what? So then, so I'm just imagining this is how they feel when they get this back. I thought I said it, but oh, they're teaching me something here. Zephyrus, that means the west wind. Okay. Eke with his sweet breath. Also with his sweet breath. Oh, also. Eka. So we're learning something about early modern English here. Inspired hath in every holt and help. Hath, right? Breathe life into, inspired. Okay. So this is just an exercise of fun. How does it feel? All right, thank you for coming.